What are the key characteristics before the appearance of the Antichrist? If you've ever asked these questions, we want you to stay tuned for this episode of New Life Today as we look at the scripture to try to get some answers on that. Stay tuned. We looked at on a last video, which I encourage you to go back and look at if you've not seen it, about key characteristics that will precede the appearance of the Antichrist. The first one we dealt with was a great falling away. The second one that we see is we find that lawlessness and iniquity will abound, and that it will eventually come to a point that it will reach its fullness. Let me give you just a few verses of Scripture. In Matthew 24:12, it says, "And because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold." Now, in that verse of Scripture, oftentimes, in times past, we have preached that people's love would grow cold towards God, towards Christianity, towards the Scripture. It certainly will, and it certainly is. But really what the writer is dealing with there is the coldness towards humanity, humanity towards humanity, men towards their neighbors and fellow individuals, that there would be a coldness. And here is the picture that we can draw from, is that if due to lawlessness, there is physical harm or harm to property or harm to anything going on, that because the love of many will wax cold or grow cold, they will not do anything to try to help their fellow man. They will let them just fend for themselves. We have seen this just recently in an incident in Philadelphia where a young lady was being violated by a rider for nearly 45 minutes. And instead of the passengers of that train helping this lady, they sat there and used their cell phones to take video. And so that is the waxing of the coldness of love that we see. That really the opinion becomes, well, it's not happening to me, so why should I get involved? And so Jesus tells his disciples that in the last days, lawlessness would abound and that the love of many would grow cold. So we see this working throughout the scripture. In 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 13, the scripture says, "But evil men and seducers or impostors shall grow worse and worse, deceiving and being deceived." So there will be a lawlessness, there will be seducers, there will be evil that will begin to grow. In fact, when we look, there are some videos that we dealt with about the beast rising up out of the sea and the beast rising up out of the earth. If you've not seen those videos, I encourage you to go to our New Life Today page and catch those. Again, they are just 8 to 10 minute videos. We bring you short, concise, biblical videos to try to help you with understanding the times. But when we read about that beast that comes up out of the sea, we find a great picture in Daniel chapter 8 of really one of the key features that will happen before the Antichrist appears. In fact, in the book of Daniel, when he deals with the 8th chapter and he talks about those beasts, he talks about the lion, he talks about the bear, he talks about the leper with wings of an eagle, he talks about the ram and the goat, and he talks about these animals that represents kingdoms that would come. He says in the 23rd verse that in a latter time of their kingdom, now he's talking about the previous kingdoms before this, in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors have reached their fullness, a king shall arise having fierce features who understands sinister schemes. Now, this was talking about Antiochus Epiphanes, who would come up and he would be a picture of the Antichrist. In fact, when you read biblical prophecy, To many Orthodox people, they believe that that is what Revelation was talking about, and so many others, that these things have already happened. And so they don't really look to it as a future tense. But here he talks about in the latter times of those kingdoms, that when the transgressors have reached their fullness, a king will arise. Now, I want you to pay attention to that term, when their transgressions have reached their fullness. When we go over into the book of Revelation, there is a 10-kingdom confederacy that will be formed. Out of those 10 kingdoms, there will become a political leader that will overthrow 3 of them, and then he'll do it by force, he'll do it by flattery, and then the other kingdoms will acquiesce their power to him with no further war. And this individual will come up. So we find one of the key characteristics preceding the Antichrist, not just being the falling away that we dealt with again on a previous video, but also transgression and iniquity reaching its fullness. Now, God has always given people opportunity before the cup of iniquity is full. Let me give you a couple of for instances. When you go into the book of Genesis, you read a couple of areas where the cup of iniquity had not quite reached its fullness. One is when Abraham goes and he sees the promised land. And in seeing that promised land, God says, I'm going to give this land to your seed, to their inheritance. And he says to them, I'm not going to do it yet because the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. So he holds off and allows another 450 years for that iniquity to fill up. It is the same way with Sodom and Gomorrah. He goes down to see where they have reached their peak. Same way with Noah before the flood. He goes down to see where men's hearts are. And of course, he says they are continually evil. And so God begins to bring judgment. One of the reasons why the Antichrist comes, or one of the pictures of him arising, or characteristics before he arises, is because iniquity finds its fullness. Here's what the scripture said. Let me read it to you one more time. Matthew 24:12 and 2 Timothy 3:13. And because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. We are seeing that lawlessness beginning to abound. We are seeing as those who are lawless are beginning to actually be protected, and those who hold to the law and those who are law-abiding are almost being pointed out as the problem children. Then in 2 Timothy 3:13, it says, but evil men and seducers, impostors shall grow worse and worse, deceiving and being deceived. So you have this second key feature of lawlessness that abounds and iniquity that abounds until it reaches its fullness. So what are the children of God supposed to do? Well, I want you to stay tuned with me for another video where we're going to answer that question. Listen, if you enjoyed this, we want you to click that subscribe button. We want you to give us a thumbs up and ring the little bell that's down there so that you can be alerted and you can share these videos with somebody else. Again, until next time, I'm praying for you. God bless you.